Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Journalism and New Media Studies, SOJNMS. Certificate in Community Radio, CCR, English. Course 1. CCRBJM001 Introduction to Community Radio. Block-4 Managing a Community Radio Station. Unit 14 Rules. To be used for the public good. The right of citizens and communities to have access to the radio waves comes from Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India, which guarantees the fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression. Radio broadcasting in India is still governed by the relevant provisions of the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885. Over the years, the Act has been amended several times and the Government of India has notified many codes, guidelines, policies etc. to take care of different aspects of radio broadcasting, including community radio. However, in spite of several attempts, India has never had a real broadcast act that covers all the technical as well as program aspects of radio and TV. Following the 1995 Supreme Court judgment on the airwaves, see below, some failed attempts were made to introduce a proper broadcast law in India. At present, a Broadcasting Services Regulation Bill 2007 is being discussed along with a code of conduct for broadcasters, but it is not known if and when this would become a law, since there is no single law in India that governs all the aspects of radio broadcasting. Community broadcasters have to be familiar with all the existing laws, codes, guidelines, policies and advisories that concern broadcasting, and also some of the press, media and telecommunication laws and the relevant parts of the Indian Penal Code that affect radio broadcasting. 14.1 Objectives. This unit will help you to understand the rules and regulations governing community radio operation in India. Explain step by step the procedure for application to obtain a community radio license. Comprehend community radio laws in other parts of Asia and the pioneering works across the world. Formulate the rules for accepting advertisement for a community radio. Discuss the overall status of the broadcast bill. 14.2 Steps leading to community radio license policy. Until the early 1990s, broadcasting in India was a government monopoly, and the public service broadcaster, All India Radio, was owned and run by the state. However, by the 1990s, because of the entry of satellite TV into India and other technological advances in broadcasting, people began to feel the need for more freedom for radio and television. It became clear to everyone that the existing rules and regulations were no longer sufficient to govern electronic media. A case between the Secretary, Ministry of Information. 14.2. 1 Supreme Court, Judgment on Airwaves 1995. The Supreme Court studied the situation very carefully and noted that it was, undoubtedly, unsatisfactory. The court said that this was the result of legislations in this country not keeping pace with the technological developments. While all the democracies in the world have enacted laws specifically governing the broadcasting media, this country has lagged behind, rooted in the Telegraph Act of 1885, which is wholly inadequate and unsuited to an important medium like radio and television, i.e., broadcasting media. It is absolutely essential, in the interests of public, in the interests of the freedom of speech and expression guaranteed by Article 19(1)(a), and with a view to avoid confusion, uncertainty and consequent litigation, that Parliament steps in soon to fill the void by enacting a law or laws, as the case may be, governing the broadcasting media, i.e., both radio and television media. 111 On the issue of whether private radio and TV should be allowed in India. The Supreme Court said that this was for Parliament to decide. Importantly, it added that the fact remains that private broadcasting, even if allowed, should not be left to market forces, in the interest of ensuring that a wide variety of voices enjoy access to it. This is one of the reasons why, when private commercial radio was allowed in India in the year 2000, in each of 40 cities where FM frequencies were auctioned to set up commercial FM radio channels, one FM frequency was reserved for social concerns and offered to Indira Gandhi National Open University, IGNOU. These stations are now well known as Gyan Vani Educational Radio. However, this did not satisfy activists who wanted community ownership, and there was a widespread demand for community radio as well, so that a wide variety of voices could enjoy access to it. 14.2.2 Bangalore Declaration 1996. Soon after the Supreme Court judgment on airwaves, a movement for demanding community ownership of radio frequencies had started. A group of policy planners, media professionals and civil society organizations gathered in Bangalore in September 1996 to study how community radio could be relevant in India. A Bangalore Declaration was signed, which became the basis of advocacy for community radio in India. Some years later, in July 2000, UNESCO helped to organize a workshop on community radio in Andhra Pradesh, in Pastpur and Hyderabad, where Deccan Development Society, with support from UNESCO, was already using community participatory methods in narrowcasting for empowerment of Dalit women. The Pastpur Initiative on Community Radio urged the government to create a three-tier structure for radio broadcasting in India: public service radio, private commercial radio and non-profit community radio. In August 2001, the Indira Gandhi National Open University, IGNOU, held a consultation in New Delhi where the importance of community participation in radio was again discussed. Although the focus of the consultation was IGNOU's Gyan Vani radio channels, it was suggested that up to 40% of the broadcast time on Gyan Vani should be reserved for community programming. 14.2.3 Community Radio Guidelines 2002. In December 2002, the Ministry of Information, News and Current Affairs programs were not allowed on these campus community radio stations, and advertisements were also banned. These radio stations were meant to serve the student community as well as the larger community outside the boundary of the campus. In accordance with this policy, the first community radio license was granted to Anna University in Chennai. In February 2004, Anna University's Anna 90.4 FM became the first privately owned radio station to come up under a community radio policy. It was hoped that at least 1,000 campus-based community radio stations would come up in India in the next couple of years, but the government's CR policy offering License 0, LLYLO educational institutes to run community participatory radio stations did not prove very successful. Till December 2006, less than 100 applications were received, and only 23 campus community radio stations were running in the country. It was evident that educational institutions did not find the prospect of running a community radio station with no means of revenue generation alluring enough. Meanwhile, civil society organizations had been active in their demand for allowing community groups, non-governmental organizations etc. to set up community radio stations. Keeping in mind the limited response from educational institutions for community radio license and the growing demand from NGOs, the government in 2004 decided to review the 2002 Community Radio Guidelines and began to involve the public in their discussions. 14. 2.4 Policy changes to include NGOs. In the meantime, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, the broadcast regulator, also held parallel public consultations on community radio and submitted its recommendations to the government in December 2004. TRI recommended that any legal entity, including individuals and religious groups, should be allowed to apply for a community radio license, and that news and current affairs programs should be allowed on community radio. TRI also suggested that 5 minutes of advertisements per hour show it be allowed on crossing. The draft community radio policy was finally approved by the Union Cabinet on 16 November 2006. Under the new policy, non-profit organizations like civil society and voluntary group could also apply for community radio license. The three categories that the government now recognizes as legitimate claimants for community radio license are educational institutions, Krishi Vigyan Kendras, non-profit organizations like civil society and voluntary groups. Terms and conditions for grant of license for all these three categories are identical. 14.3 Community Radio Application Procedure. The new policy modified in 2007 opened up community radio licensing to most community-based, non-profit organizations, including civil society and voluntary organizations, ICAR. Institutions, Krishi Vigyan Kendras, registered societies and autonomous bodies in public trusts registered under Societies Act or any other such act relevant for the purpose. The applicant organization's registration should be at least 3 years old, and the organization must have a proven record of at least 3 years of service to the local community. 14.3.1 Steps for grant of license. Under the new CR policy, any eligible organization can apply for a license at any time, along with a processing fee OFRs 0.2500. A letter of intent, LOI, would be issued after getting clearances from the Ministries of Home Affairs and Defense, and the Ministry of Human Resources Development if the applicant is an educational institution. With the issue of LOI, a frequency, like 94 MHz or 107.8 MHz, would be earmarked for the potential community broadcaster. After obtaining the necessary clearances from the Department of Telecommunications, a wireless operating license known as SACFA clearance is granted to the applicant. The applicant then signs a Grant of Permission Agreement, GOPA, with the Ministry of Information. Area of coverage. The policy states that the community radio stations, CRS, should be designed to serve a specific well-defined local community, and that it should have an ownership and management structure that is reflective of the community that the CRS seeks to serve. The policy recommends that at least 50% of the station management committee should be members of the community and that half the members of the management committee should consist of women. It is also prescribed in the policy that the programs broadcast over community radio should be relevant to the educational, developmental, social and cultural needs of the community. News programs, of an otherwise political nature, are banned on community radio stations. Community radio is allowed to broadcast 5 minutes of advertisements per hour, relating to local events, local businesses and services. 14.3.3 The Selection Committee for Grant of License. The government has also set up a selection committee for screening applications from NGOs and voluntary organizations. This selection committee not only includes officials from the ministry but also representatives from the Go sector and international agencies. The committee studies application forms, checks all the documents submitted and also invites the applicant organization to appear before the committee for interaction. However, for educational institutions and Krishi Vigyan Kendras, the process of grant of license is much faster as there is a single window clearance. For NGOs and voluntary organizations, clearance from several ministries is required before the LOI can be issued. 14.4 The Licensing Policy. The applicant organization is permitted only one CR license, and the license period for community radio is 5 years. There is no license fee, although a spectrum usage fee of about 19,000 rupees per year is charged by the Ministry of CVH-1 UNACLSHN, as already mentioned, the Ministry of Information, Community Participation, and that programs should ideally be in the local language or dialect. News is banned on community radio. 5 minutes of advertising per hour is allowed on crossing. Community radio stations are expected to preserve all the programs broadcast from the station for a period of 3 months. Community radio stations are expected to cover a range of 5 to 10 kilometers, using a transmitter with maximum effective radiated power, ERP, of 100 watts. In special cases, where the applicant organization is able to establish that it needs to serve a larger area or the terrain so warrants, higher transmitter power up to 250 watts is possible on a case-to-case basis. The maximum height of the antenna above ground level is restricted to 30 meters, the minimum height being 15 meters. For NGOs and community-based organizations, the transmitter and antenna should be located within the geographical area of the community they seek to serve. 14.4.1 Documents required for submission of application. General information to be provided by all applicants. L. An area map indicating the entire area of service to be covered by the community radio, identifying the location where transmitter, if any, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Additional information to be furnished by different categories of applicants. For educational institutions, 1. Documents, like certificate under Section 12A of L Income Tax Act or any other document in support of the institution being non-profit. 2. Documentary proof whether the institution is recognized by A. Central government, B. State government. For agricultural universities and Krishi Vigyan Kendras, KVKs. 1. Documentary proof whether the institution 1 organization is recognized by 1. A. Central government, B. State government. 1. For NGOs and other voluntary organizations. 1. 2. A copy of the Memorandum of Articles of Association. Details and attested photocopy of the registration certificate, whether registered under Societies Act or any other such act relevant to the purpose. Certified copies of the balance sheet for the last 3 years of the organization. Go. Civil society organization. 4. Details and supporting documents if grants have been received from the central government, state government, multilateral agencies. 14.4.2 Time frame for application processing. Once an application has been received, the Ministry of Information, which the applicant has to go through before the final license for operation can be obtained. Usually for NGOs and voluntary groups there is an additional step of presentation before a screening committee in Delhi. LOI, SACFA, GOPA, 14.4.3.1 LOI. LOI or the letter of intent is issued by the Ministry of Information. Community radio category is available in the area of operation and can be allotted to the applicant. 14.4.3.2 SACFA. Within 1 month of the issue of the letter of intent, LOI, the eligible applicant will be required to apply for allotment of frequency, SACFA, to the Department of Telecommunications. SACFA stands for Standing Advisory Committee on Radio Frequency Allocation. Before setting out to apply for SACFA clearance, it is advisable to get the bank draft of 19 rupees, 5,000 ready in hand. SACFA application also requires geocoordinates and AMSL information which has to be obtained using a standard global positioning system, GPS, receiver. The applicant has to register online on WPC SACFA website and necessary clearance is issued by the SACFA Secretariat. 14.4.3.3 GOPA. A time frame of 6 months from the date of application is prescribed for issue of SACFA clearance. On receipt of SACFA clearance, a copy of which shall be submitted by the applicant, the LOI holder shall furnish a bank guarantee in the prescribed format for a sum of 25,000. Thereupon, the LOI holder will be invited to sign a grant of permission agreement, GOPA, by Ministry of I. Community Radio Policy. The global context. From the time that regular radio broadcasting began around 1920, state-controlled commercial stations have dominated airwaves. Non-commercial broadcasting didn't really start until FM radio became technically and economically feasible after World War XI. During the 50s, in the United States of America, FM radio was mostly ignored by broadcasters. A number of college-based stations went on the air, and some commercial broadcasters picked up FM licenses so that they could rebroadcast the signals of their AM stations. The concept of community participation and ownership of radio stations began in South America. Some of the earliest stations set up since 1949 were totally makeshift arrangements, mostly without any legal sanction and operated by volunteers and radio enthusiasts. These stations assumed that anyone could learn to do radio programs and allowed almost everyone who wanted a chance behind the microphone. They played almost every kind of music imaginable and gave airtime to people with extremely diverse points of view. The 50s decade also saw the beginning of the movement for community broadcasting. The community radio enthusiasts joined together to lobby with the government for recognition, exchanged information, distributed programs, and generally advanced the